The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Explosive show today. Glad you were here. On Tuesday night, Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz out. Then yesterday, we had John Kasich say the exact same thing. No path to the Republican nomination. Kasich dropping out of the Republican race, not punching or elbowing his wife in the face like Ted Cruz did as a sort of goodbye, but still dropping out. That I know for sure, leaving none other than Donald Trump as the only remaining Republican presidential candidate. He did it, as I mentioned, number one, saying there's really no path forward, and number two, without any violent acts committed against his wife. He was mathematically eliminated a long time ago. Recently, Lewis, didn't we calculate that Kasich needed more than double the number of available delegates? I mean, the mathematical path disappeared a while ago.
Yeah, when you need more than 100% of available delegates, things do not look good for you. And so I wish Kasich all the best.
Yes, absolutely. And already being floated as a possible vice presidential running mate for Donald Trump. We'll get to that later in the show. Some interesting developments, though, since Donald Trump has become the presumptive Republican nominee. George W. Bush, former President George W. Bush, commented that he would not be commenting on the on the presidential race in 2016. This has huge significance. It is a comment. When a former president, the day that the lone remaining Republican nominee becomes the presumptive front runner, nobody else is running. When a former president comes out, or his spokesperson, and says, George W. Bush will not be commenting, that is a comment with a lot of meaning, isn't it?
Maybe. It's not like, well, because there's no one in the race. Not that he's been commenting much to this point anyway. Now Donald Trump is unopposed, and so there's no harm in saying anything, right?
Well, he's basically saying, I don't like this guy enough to actually try to help him win against the Democratic nominee, against the eventual Democratic nominee. We heard a similar statement from a George H.W. Bush spokesperson who said that George H.W. Bush will also be staying silent this year. This is the first presidential race since George H.W. Bush himself was president where he will not be participating. Now, the statement did say he's 91 years old and retired from politics. So sort of saying maybe this isn't so much about Trump, but it's about his age. But still, the day after Trump is the only remaining candidate, or the day of, actually, saying, yeah, this is for the first time in decades, George H.W. Bush is not going to be participating here. And then we've seen a lot of Republicans say they will support Trump, but they will not endorse Trump, which is basically saying, I'll vote for the guy over Bernie or Hillary, but I won't like it.
Yeah. And so I don't know, like we've said, Hillary Clinton is pretty far to the right when it comes to Democrats. So, I mean, if you want to, when it comes to the financial issues, Donald Trump is more liberal than her in many cases, right?
On some issues, no doubt about it.
I mean, taxation.
Which is crazy enough.
The big banks. There are probably others, but they should be voting for Hillary.
Yeah, I don't know that on taxation Trump is more liberal. I mean, he said his now that we've actually analyzed his tax plan, it would be hugely beneficial to the very, very rich. And while Hillary Clinton no doubt has a sort of corporatist pander or acquiesce to the needs and desires of the very rich element, I think Trump is definitely to the right of her on that. But we've discussed plenty of issues where Trump is to the left of Hillary Clinton. So the micro issue, which we'll get into in a second, is who's willing to be Trump's VP. The slightly less micro issue is stopping Trump. But the macro issue is how on earth has our education and culture failed so badly that there are this many people in the U.S. willing to support Trump for president? That's a much more difficult problem to solve than just stopping Trump now.
All we needed to do was throw someone like Trump at them in the first place, which we haven't done before. So now we've done it, and now we see the true colors of American voters.
This is not a joke, okay? In the continuing comedy of errors that is the Donald Trump campaign, Trump has hired former Republican presidential candidate and de facto hypnotherapist Ben Carson to help select the eventual vice presidential candidate as part of Trump's VP selection committee. You can no longer distinguish reality from a satirical news headline. But yes, Ben Carson, who suspended his own presidential campaign several months ago, ultimately endorsed Trump in March. Carson, I guess, is in a way an ideal person to have involved in Trump's campaign. He has said that the outcome of the Holocaust would have been different if Jews had had handguns. He fabricated a story about being admitted to West Point. He said he believes that the real reason that Egyptian pyramids were built was to store grain, and he compared advocates of marriage equality to pedophiles. So in a lot of ways, Lewis, there is no better person than Ben Carson to involve in this amazingly abortive and hilarious Trump campaign.
Well, as Carson had said before, there was kind of a deal made between Trump and Carson about some type of position in the administration.
Right.
And it seems like Trump is keeping his promise. So there's at least that what Carson called an advisory role type thing happening here.
I wonder who will be the most qualified VP candidate as recommended by Ben Carson. Remember back in 1999 or 2000, in early 2000, Dick Cheney, then CEO of Halliburton, was in charge of George W. Bush's vice presidential search committee. And Lewis, Dick Cheney carried out an extensive search. He looked high and low. He looked under rocks and at the tops of mountains for the best possible VP candidate for George W. Bush. And after giving his recommendations to George W. Bush, he ended up being selected himself as apparently the best option to be George W. Bush's vice president. Can you imagine Carson coming to Trump and saying, I have gone through all possible candidates, and I've been able to come only to one conclusion. I am the best option. Is that a possibility?
Yes, definitely a possibility. Would be a pretty big mistake for Donald Trump because who really cares about Ben Carson? Nobody. It's not going to help you win against Hillary or Bernie. No way.
Trump has hired Ben Carson to pick a vice president, and Carson has hired an entire team of people to wake him up every few minutes so he can keep searching the internet for potential VP candidates. Can we say with certitude that Carson won't come back and recommend Sarah Palin? Is that completely off the table?
No. I don't have much faith in Carson for anything, but I know he won't go that far.
Nikki Haley, the Republican governor of South Carolina, part Native American, has been mentioned as a potentially good choice strategically. The only problem is, seems she despises Trump. She was actively hostile to him during parts of the Republican primary. I would actually love a Carly Fiorina selection because Carly would then have a chance, Lewis, of losing 3 times during the same presidential election.
That would be a spectacle. Yeah.
Most of the shortlists, though, have already said no thanks in some way, or at least said they're not particularly interested. Not everybody has. There's New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez. How does a Hispanic female governor maintain credibility on a Donald Trump ticket? I mean, it's almost a goof, isn't it? The idea of a Hispanic woman, New Mexico governor, being on the anti-woman, anti-immigrant Trump ticket.
Yes, or does her being on that ticket instantly make it a pro-female, pro-immigrant ticket?
The identity
that
politics
would actually be a pretty good idea.
Taking the identity politics approach. Hey,
yeah, well,
I've got a woman there.
Game.
Got a Hispanic woman there. I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm just building a huge wall that I'm going to make Mexico pay for.
A Hispanic woman on the Donald Trump ticket would do way better than an African-American male who is asleep.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I think at minimum, his VP candidate has to stay awake or appear to be awake. I think that that's a pretty reasonable bar.
Or at least keep people awake while interacting with them.
Either he or the audience needs to remain awake for it to be even remotely effective. Okay, I've mentioned that Donald Trump's Republican candidacy has brought the racists and the xenophobes and the nationalists and the white supremacists out of the woodwork and has really galvanized them. And one notable member of that group is former KKK leader David Duke, who is thrilled about Trump's victory over what he calls Jew supremacists. It was only a matter of time, Lewis, before we heard from David Duke. He talked about this on, apparently Duke has a radio show, and here's what he had to say about reigning victorious over Jew supremacists. Take a listen.
Clinton, and I think, what do you think? I think these Jewish extremists have made a terribly crazy miscalculation, because all they're really going to be doing by doing the Never Trump movement is exposing their alien, their anti-American majority position to all the Republicans, and they're going to push people more into awareness that the neocons are the problem, that these Jewish supremacists who control our country are the real problem, and the reason why America is not great.
Yeah, it's always the Jews, huh? I mean, 0.19% of the world population, under 1.5% of the U.S. population. They're the reason America isn't great, not retrograde conservatism, but Jewish extremists are the problem.
I don't know about you. I'm still waiting on that position of power that I'm apparently entitled to. It's Dave. 31 years. I still haven't heard one word about it. I hope it's coming.
The thing that really doesn't make sense in all of this is that Trump's daughter by conversion and Trump's son-in-law by birth and Trump's grandkids, they're all Jewish. I mean, the anti-Semitic contingent of the American electorate, to the extent that they're involved in politics, are overwhelmingly supporting the guy who half his family is Jewish, although clearly Trump himself does not identify with Judaism. But you would think that at some point that would enter and they'd say, well, hold on a second. Trump, his daughter's Jewish. He hasn't complained about that. Hasn't complained about his daughter marrying a Jewish guy. His grandkids, he seems to love them. They're Jewish. Maybe this guy isn't the big counterpoint to so-called Jewish supremacy that we thought.
Or maybe just Mexicans are more of a problem for David Duke than Jews, but he'll still bring it up.
Trump may not have the black vote, as we'll talk about later. Trump may not have the women's vote, as we'll talk about later, or the Hispanic vote, or the independent vote. But he has the Aryan Nation vote seemingly sewn up, although Trump is tracking worse than Romney with white voters. And we're going to talk about that later. There are some really interesting new polls that CNN ORC has put out. Trump is underperforming among white voters. I'll talk about that later in the show. Any comments about what we've talked about so far, tweet me. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. Lewis is on Twitter at LewisMotamedy. And we're all on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is mostly supported by viewers and listeners like you through the David Pakman Show membership program. Today's new member of the day is Cynthia Acuna Goitizolo. Cynthia, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can sign up like Cynthia did at davidpakman.com/membership. On that note, it is happening, Lewis. We are giving away 32 gigabyte David Pakman Show branded USB flash drives with membership. Sign up for a discounted membership. I like, Lewis, the numbers associated typically with USB flash drive storage. So what we're doing is 16% off your yearly membership and a 32 gigabyte USB flash drive branded with the David Pakman Show logo for free. davidpakman.com/flash drive. That is the only place to get the free flash drive with your membership. This is very cool, I think.
This is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, actually. Yeah. It's, Dave, I'm speechless. I'm baffled at the awesomeness of this deal.
Yep.
I hope people take advantage of it.
How many of these do you anticipate buying?
At least 100,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. davidpakman.com/flash drive. Free shipping in the U.S., extra internationally. I'd love to give away 100 of these. That is my goal, Lewis. 100 David Pakman USB flash drives, 32 gigabytes, 16% off membership, 32 gigabyte flash drive. That would be huge.
Maybe I'll just cancel about $250,000 of my current memberships and then get this new one.
Right. So this will be available for the next week. The earlier you sign up, the faster we will be able to get you the flash drive. davidpakman.com/flash drive. And as is always the case, you get to keep your discounted membership rate for as long as you like. Okay, I have a recommendation today that I know Lewis is titillated by. This is one of Lewis's primary topics of conversation socially now. It is, of course, the program Black Mirror. This is I believe, Lewis, it's now in season 3.
Yeah.
The seasons are quite short, 3 episodes per season. It is available on Netflix. It's a British television. They call it an anthology series. I don't exactly know what that means. I just know that there's only 3 episodes per season. It's called Black Mirror. I describe it as speculative fiction. Some people might call it, I guess, sort of sci-fi or dystopian sci-fi. How do you describe it?
Yeah, I would just call it fiction.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah. So, there are only 3 episodes a season.
quite a way with words
And
there. Just
yes,
fiction.
Yes. Well, I don't like to, to get too much into the weeds.
It's dark.
It's dark, but it focuses on technology.
Right.
And every episode is between 45 minutes and an hour, maybe.
Yeah, around 45 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. This is one of I think one of the best shows on Netflix, and it started as was it a BBC thing or just produced?
It's British, but it was produced by Zeppetron for Endemol. So I don't know if it was BBC, but maybe BBC carried it at some point. I'm not really sure about that. I know it's on Netflix now. That I can say with certitude.
It is. Check it out. And there's one of these episodes that I think is one of the best. I mean, I call each one basically a short film.
Yeah.
One of the best short films I've ever seen. And the newest one has John Hamm in it. It's
Of Mad Men
fantastic.
fame.
Yep. Great actor. Great episode.
There are some great ones. There is one that really looks at memory in a very interesting way. There is another one that looks at the possible future world where people need to be generating electricity by riding bicycles. And there is a sort of currency that you earn by generating electricity, which then you can use for everyday spending, sort of thing. Every episode really does take a look at how technology could go bad, and I'd call it in the near future, not in the far future by any means.
The first episode is certainly not even futuristic at all. I mean, that is something that could happen today,
Right.
And that's an interesting look at the way technology
Could be
I
misused.
wouldn't say works, but can shape the way things happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Black Mirror, it's on Netflix. I could not recommend it more forcefully. And I know Lewis will recommend my recommendation of something he originally recommended, I recommend to you. And that's what I've done today. I think that can't put a finer point on it than that. Okay, I want to be very clear in my disclaimer and what we're about to talk about. I've already said you may hear that Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders are ahead of Donald Trump in hypothetical November matchup polls. We're going to discuss these polls. I'm going to discuss one of them today. Do not allow yourself, be it by me or anybody over the next few months, to be lulled into some sense of safety with regard to the November election. I don't need to vote. Trump has no shot, no problem, no sweat. I'm going to stay home. I'm going to talk about what the polls say. The polls exist. We would not ignore the polls because they are fascinating. But to the extent that you hear Trump is way behind nationally, remember, anything can happen. Every single vote is going to matter in November. With that disclaimer out there, we have a new CNN ORC poll. It was completed just ahead of Donald Trump's recent victory in Indiana. It found that Hillary Clinton, currently in a hypothetical matchup with Trump in November, has a 13-point lead, 54-41. This is her largest lead in these hypothetical matchups since last July. Where did this lead come from? I will tell you where it came from demographically, but one of these sort of bigger picture changes that has taken place is yes, Donald Trump is the elected official or the presidential candidate that has the most negatives in terms of the last who knows how many decades of major national candidates. And Hillary Clinton is not that far behind in terms of negatives. But Hillary Clinton's net negativity has dropped from 13%. In other words, positives minus negatives were at negative 13% some months ago in the same CNN ORC poll. She is now only at a net negative of -1. And that clearly, Lewis, maybe in relationship to Donald Trump's candidacy, people saying, well, compared to Trump, Hillary is not as bad as I thought. That is absolutely helping her in these national polls.
Yes. Trump is the worst. And while it's fascinating, people are coming to their senses now. And if you know that you have to vote, if you feel you have to vote, well, if you have a level head, you'll pick Hillary over Donald.
Let's look, before we go at the demographics, at the issues. On one important issue, Trump is polling better than Hillary Clinton. That issue is who would do a better job handling the economy. Trump is 50% on that, Hillary Clinton at 45%. On every other important issue, who would be better with terrorism, who would be better on immigration, who would be better on healthcare, who would be better on reducing the income gap, who would be better on foreign policy, education, and climate change, Hillary Clinton is ahead, sometimes by only 5 points over Trump, sometimes by as much as a 2-to-1 margin, about 2/3 to 1/3 on some of these issues, like, for example, climate change or foreign policy. Now, issues aside, here's the most important and interesting part of this poll. Hillary is way up with minorities. That's not really surprising to anybody. Hillary is way up with women. That's not really surprising to anybody. Hillary is doing better with white voters than Obama did versus Mitt Romney in 2012. Considering the changing demographics of the U.S., it would be difficult to win even if Trump matched Mitt Romney's support from white voters, even if he matched it, and he's not matching it. Hillary Clinton is doing better with white voters now than Romney ultimately did in 2012. The non-white population as a share of the total population has increased since 2012. If Trump can't, at minimum, match Romney's white support, it is game over. Now, Donald Trump is also saying he's pulling in Democrats, registered Democrats, to his side. No evidence that that is going on, Lewis. So some of these demographic issues are a real problem for Trump.
It's interesting to think about. I'm not really sure how accurate this information really is.
Right.
I don't like polls.
It's accurate, but it's early. That's the issue.
That's it. It's early. And so we're talking about the general election here. I mean, what's going to happen when they start debating? What is going to happen when the attack ads start coming out?
No doubt.
What's going to happen when Donald Trump starts acting more like the liberal he
probably really is
appearing to be at this point? That could all change.
So let's look at the 2012 election map, and I'll talk you through some scenarios here. Back in 2012, President Obama defeated Mitt Romney 332 to 206 in terms of the electoral vote. Of course, 270 is the magic number to become the president. So 332 to 206, President Obama needed 270, received 332, had 62 votes in excess of the minimum required to win the presidency. Donald Trump says that he could win Florida, right? Florida is Trump's second home state. If we were to flip Florida from the Democrat to the Republican, Trump would be at 235 and and Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders would be at 303. Let's stay on the map, Lewis. That's still not enough, right? If we match the 2012 results and flip Florida to Trump, Trump still loses significantly. Let's talk about New York State. Trump says, hey, I'm from New York. I could win New York State, a traditionally, historically Democratic blue state. Well, political experts don't think Trump could do that. But if you flip New York and Florida to Donald Trump, Hillary or Bernie still win, 274 to 264. Now, let's assume for a second, a more likely scenario, Trump gets Florida, but not New York. And then, as he says he might do, is able to flip Michigan to the red column for the Republican. He says trade deals have hurt manufacturing in Michigan. I'm going to win Michigan. And let's say that Trump flips Ohio. This is an optimistic scenario right now for Trump. He gets Florida to flip, he gets Ohio to flip, and he gets the historically blue Michigan to flip. Even in that scenario, Lewis, we have a tie, 269 to 269. So the point I'm making is Trump needs to drastically overperform what Mitt Romney was able to do in 2012 to even have a shot at a tie here.
Yes. So Obama had things going for him that were unprecedented.
Yes.
During that election.
Right.
I mean, I don't see Hillary pulling that kind of stuff in this election.
I know why you're saying it. However, if we look at the indicators now, the key groups that helped President Obama achieve victory, non-white voters, women voters, they are doing better. Hillary Clinton is doing better with those groups than President Obama ultimately did in his reelection. And if that holds, that is huge. Do not stay home. This is not going to be a gimme. I am just telling you what the polls say today.
I think Donald Trump's VP pick is going to be the most important thing of all.
You think so? It rarely matters.
How could it
that
not
much.
be? I mean, what VP is really going to give Hillary a huge boost with people that aren't currently supporting her? With Donald Trump,
Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
This guy
that
named
would never
Bernie
happen.
Sanders?
Yeah, wouldn't happen.
All right, we will take a break. Great interview coming up next with David McAfee.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by David McAfee, who's a journalist, religious studies graduate, and author of The Belief Book, which is a tool that's available to parents to teach their children about religions and beliefs. So, David, in the book, The Belief Book, are you teaching, what's the approach to teaching children about religions? Is it similar to sort of teaching about the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, or is it taught, what's the sort of angle?
Yeah, there's definitely some similarities between fairy tales, mythologies, religions. They all fit within certain categories, and beliefs happen to fit all of those. I mean, there are people who believe all sorts of things, including in fairy tales. So the Belief Book was really an attempt to explain where beliefs come from and how our ancestors formed their first religions, where they got the idea that there might be a God in the sky, and how those stories passed on from generation to generation and to what we have today.
And what have been some of the reactions to the book? I mean, certainly, I'm sure it's an appreciated tool for many parents who have a certain perspective on religion, but I can't imagine this approach is thrilling to everybody.
Well, no, definitely not. I've had a lot of criticisms, but believe it or not, most of those are from people who haven't actually read the book. It's not, a lot of people say that it's a tool to indoctrinate people into atheism and stuff like that. But the book really, it doesn't even mention the word atheism. It doesn't mention atheists or people who don't believe. It's just about religions and beliefs. And it's basically if the United States had a comprehensive religious education program like they do in Europe, this would be the type of thing that they would be learning in elementary school. It's basically a little textbook for kids on where religions come from and how our ancestors put those into place. And it's based on what I learned in college. So it's not an opinion. It's just kind of it's a dumbed down version, a version that children can understand of what I went through when I majored in religious studies.
Yeah, isn't that sort of what's missing from a lot of conversations around religion in the U.S., which is, for example, the debate around whether or not to teach creationism in science class? I mean, it's important to have that discussion. I believe that it shouldn't be in science class, but there is actually a place for talking about creationism and intelligent design in school. But shouldn't it be more in the context of how religion came about and how these sort of various creation ideas were formed? It seems there is a place for it, but it's not science class.
You are exactly right. I completely agree. And I've been a very vocal advocate for religious education programs in the United States that mirror or are built off of programs that they already have in areas in Europe. We don't teach our children about religious study, about religions, about where they come from or how they interacted. We might have a little bit in our history classes or something like that, but nothing, or Greek mythology, but it's separate and it should be comprehensive. And when people don't learn about that stuff, then they learn about it only from their parents or from their family. And those aren't unbiased sources. Those are people who are going to have their own agenda and they're going to push it onto them. So I'm definitely in favor of a comprehensive religious education program, and creationism would definitely, I mean, a creation myths section of that class would be perfect.
Let's talk a little bit about atheism and spirituality. I talk to many people who, when the topic of their religious beliefs comes up, they say, well, I don't consider myself religious, but I am spiritual. And of course, the term spiritual, depending on how you define it, could have pretty drastically different meanings. Talk to me first. What's your general view of when people make that claim, right? I'm not a religious person, but I am spiritual. Is it a claim that makes sense? And what do you think people mean by that?
It does make sense in certain circumstances. And I think there are at least two different really common people who, archetypes of people who say that. There's somebody who really is not religious but spiritual, somebody who doesn't adhere to a particular religion. They're not a Christian, they're not a Muslim, they're not a Buddhist. They don't have any dogma or text, but they do believe in something larger. They could be a deist, they could believe in a God that created the earth and doesn't intervene, but they feel spiritually connected to that creature, that divine figure. Or they could be the other option, if they say they're religious but not or they're not religious but they're spiritual, is somebody who is not religious but is afraid of kind of that negative connotation with atheism or non-belief in general. So they just say that they're spiritual to kind of make people treat them a little bit better.
What are the 2 or 3 important tenets in your mind of so-called spirituality? I mean, in thinking about it myself, one would be you're really looking for meaning, right? You're looking to try to assess or establish some particular meaning of life, either of your life as an individual or maybe of humans or of existence. And the other thing I think of is, and you sort of alluded to this, the idea of something bigger than oneself, which really is also about meaning, isn't it?
Yep. I've actually never heard it put quite that way, but I definitely agree that that's something that transcends all definitions of spirituality, is something meaningful. And I would say that when I think of spirituality, I think of something involving a spirit, a soul, something supernatural and transcendent above the physical world. Not everybody uses that definition. Carl Sagan would be an example of somebody who defined spirituality as a natural wonder, the awe or wonder that he felt when thinking about the cosmos or looking at the stars. He defined that as his spirituality. Both of those have meaning in common, have something bigger than them in common, but one is supernatural and one is natural. And I think that's the important distinction that a lot of people don't understand when they talk about spirituality. So if you're defining spirituality as something that requires the supernatural or spirit, then I'm not a spiritual person. But if you take Sagan's definition, or the definition a lot of other people use, that involves meaning, awe, wonder, a sense of connection with other people, with Earth, with all living creatures, then I would be spiritual under that definition for sure.
So let me give you the example. Like our producer here, he's basically non-religious, but he has said that he's sort of open to the idea that ESP or psychics could be real. I mean, it hasn't been proven to him, right? But he's open to that idea. He thinks that there probably are so-called real psychics. Is that a form of spirituality, or is that something else?
I would say so. And under most definitions, I would say yes. And that's because these are supernatural aspects that would require some form of a spirit or soul. If you believe in ghosts, if you believe in ghosts, then that means that spirit or soul is transcending to another realm after death. If you believe in psychics, then they're able to connect with your inner soul to find out what you're thinking or what's going to happen in the future. Yep. So there are these spirits in common that would fit under spirituality. And for me, although I'm also open to the possibility, I'm open to the possibility that there could be a God too, but I just haven't seen the proof for that, and so I don't feel like believing in them's the right choice for me.
I've interviewed the president of American Atheists, David Silverman, a bunch of times, and he is sort of in the camp of, anybody who's not clearly religious is either atheist or agnostic. And he even goes further and says most people who say they're agnostic are actually atheist. And in my mind, I haven't asked him, but I think he would say people who are sort of loosely self-described as spiritual are probably more than likely, in his view, agnostics or atheists. But then you also have religious people who, when they hear someone say, well, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual, they might lean more in the direction of saying, well, no, you are religious. You just, for whatever reason, are hesitant to put a name on it. What do you think about that? I mean, there are obviously different people that for different reasons will want to sort of move so-called non-religious but spiritual people into one camp or the other, and they'd have a range of motivations for doing so. How should someone who says, I'm not religious but spiritual, think about when they hear maybe like a David Silverman say one thing and a religious conservative say another thing?
That's definitely a big issue. And I think that when people say that they're not religious but spiritual, it really depends on the specifics of that scenario. You can't really lump all of those people into atheism or into religion because it depends on their circumstances. If they're saying, I'm not religious, but I have a close relationship with Jesus, for instance, that person is religious. That person is basing their belief on a religion, on a religious figure from a religious text. So they don't like religion. They might not. They might think of it as a bad thing, which is kind of odd in my mind, but they're trying to distance themselves from the word religion, despite the fact that they still read the Bible or go to church or believe in Jesus or believe in the Holy Ghost or believe in Muhammad or whatever the religion is. So those people would clearly be, in this instance, religious. And then the people who don't have any religious text, who don't subscribe to anything, who don't believe in any deity, would be atheists. But if they believe in a general deity, they could be deists. There's just so much confusion between the terms. And you mentioned atheist and agnostic, for instance. I would be an agnostic atheist. I don't know that there's no God, so I'm agnostic, but I don't believe in them, so I'm atheist. And I think a lot of people fit into that category and don't really know it. I would say we're all agnostic, though, just because we don't know what's out there, and that's the real definition of it.
I'll mention again, the book is called The Belief Book. We've been speaking with one of the book's authors, David McAfee. Great discussion. Thanks so much for talking to me about this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
62-year-old Wayne Simmons has been a Fox News terrorism expert for a long time based on his claim that he used to be a CIA agent. Unfortunately, that claim about being a CIA agent was false, and he has now pled guilty to those fraudulent claims in federal court. He appeared on Fox News as an unpaid guest analyst on terrorism dating all the way back to 2002. And most of the charges actually had nothing to do with pretending to have CIA credentials on Fox. He actually got work, right? Government work based on his claims of being a former CIA agent. And a grand jury indicted him back in October for portraying himself as an outside paramilitary special ops officer for the CIA from 1973 to the year 2000. He pled guilty on charges of major fraud against the U.S. government, wire fraud, and also a firearms offense. He faces up to 40 years in prison. Sentencing will not be until mid-July. This guy straight up defrauded the government. He also defrauded Fox News and all of Fox News' viewers. He made all sorts of false statements to get contracts with the State Department, including the Worldwide Protective Services. He also admitted, and this is just amazing, he admitted to defrauding an unidentified woman out of $125,000 in a bogus real estate investment. This is a total crook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, con artist all around. And I don't know how people get away with this stuff. I mean, you hear stories about people getting away with things like this back in the day, like the movie Catch Me If You Can,
right,
based off that guy. I mean, we didn't have the resources we have now back then, yet somehow people are still getting away with this.
How could no one have confirmed that this guy actually wasn't what he said he was? And this brings up the bigger issue of the use of so-called experts in media. there's a lot of academic literature about the use of experts in news media. And if you study the topic, you'll first of all quickly notice that there's a huge gender gap with so-called experts in media. These experts that show up on corporate media are disproportionately male. That's sort of an aside here, kind of an issue topic for a different day. But also, interestingly, there's drastically different dynamics in terms of how these experts come to appear on TV. And very often, the so-called expert or their publicist is pitching their guest to the show. We get pitched these guests all the time. And we often get pitched pretty clearly bogus experts, and we try to be discerning. We'll get pitched non-medical experts to comment on medical topics. And you really have to look, because publicists are good at making it seem like they have the perfect guest to comment on, for example, a medical topic. And we'll read and we'll realize the guest being pitched has zero actual medical expertise. This is just one example.
Yeah, if only the term expert were regulated, right? Unfortunately, like most terms, it is not. So do your research.
Absolutely. Hey, this is an amazing story. We did a story once about a rare mushroom that was found in a Chinese town, which turned out to be a sex toy. It's one of the most notable stories we've ever done. It really sticks out in my mind as one of the most unusual and strange stories we've done. And a similar story has now surfaced out of Indonesia, where a so-called angel from heaven fell from the sky at a beach in Banggai. And it turns out that it's not an angel from the sky, in case you thought for a second it might be. It's actually an inflatable sex doll. This is so hard to believe, but it has been widely reported by serious news agencies. The people at the beach in Banggai thought that it was an angel. The fisherman who found it took the doll to his village. It was taken care of like a real human being. And you'll see, this is picture number 1 we're showing here, when the doll was naked. And then they decided to dress the doll up in, would you call this Muslim attire? I mean, they put a headscarf on the doll. Police showed up and determined that this was not an angel, but actually an anatomically correct sex toy. The area's police chief, Heru Pramukarno, has been quoted by local media as saying, "It was checked by one of our team. It was a sex toy." The police sent out a team member to see if this was actually an angel that fell from the sky, and determined that it was actually a sex toy. To refresh your memory, this is the mushroom story, and it's subtitled. And if you're just listening, this is a Chinese reporter reporting on this mushroom, a very rare mushroom that they have in like a little mini wading pool. And it's very clearly a sex toy. Take a look.
敦朴的东鹤村，在我身后啊，这里是聚集了有很多的村民。他们告诉我们说呢，前天下午他们在村子里面打井的时候呢，是发现了一个摸上去肉乎乎又像植物的东西。那么就连村子上了年纪的80多岁的老大爷也告诉我们说，他们也是从来没有见过类似于这样的东西。那么现在呢，我们就一起去上前看一看，到底这个东西究竟是什么。
朋友就帮忙这老蹦子，大约有80米，捞出来一个这肉乎乎的，不知道这啥，有鼻子有眼。
我们现在通过镜头呢，可以看到这个东西啊，长得非常像一个菌类。那这个两边呢都是有这个蘑菇头的形状，上面呢是有一个我们可以看到像嘴巴的东西，而下方呢则是一个小孔，是直接通透的。摸上去啊是非常。
Any opportunity to reference that story, Louis, I relish. Which is crazier, the angel falling from the sky and it's actually an inflatable sex doll that's anatomically correct, or the sex toy that was mistaken for a rare mushroom or plant?
The doll.
Really?
Way crazier, because I can understand people being confused about the mushroom.
Right.
Which is not, I'm just going to refer to it as a mushroom. That makes way more sense than this.
They did say it had 2 mushroom heads.
Yeah. I know why the police responded to the call. They might have been dealing with an actual corpse.
Right.
But I don't know who would look at that and think this must be some type of angel. I think education and is that it? It might be the whole thing. Education. Is that what we're talking about here?
I guess. I don't know. But it is definitely really unusual. I still find the mushroom story funnier, although probably more understandable, as Louis is suggesting. Like, maybe that was some kind of plant or mushroom. This clearly is not an angel. Mushrooms exist. We have no evidence angels exist. So that's sort of a key difference in this story. Unbelievable. We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. I received a voicemail from someone who has outlined Bernie Sanders' path to victory. Let's take a listen, see if it resonates with you.
This is how Bernie Sanders is going to get the nomination.
Okay.
He's going to take California. And then the superdelegates are going to realize that Hillary can't beat Trump. And Bernie took California, therefore he has a better chance of beating Trump. All the polls say this. They'll switch their vote to Bernie. He gets the nomination, he becomes president. I know it's kind of a wet dream, but it's my wet dream, and I hope it happens.
Okay. That is a mathematically possible scenario. That's about all we can say, right?
Yeah, it's not impossible. It could happen. It's not that outrageous.
On the bonus show today, the NFL warns players about meat from Mexico and China. Some Italian homeless individuals have rejected free vegan meals, and a tow truck driver refuses to help a Bernie supporter. I was reading about this morning. It is an unbelievable story. Get instant access to the bonus show by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. And if you want a 16% discount and a free 32 gigabyte David Pakman Show USB flash drive, sign up at davidpakman.com/flash drive. That is the only place to sign up and get that free flash drive. That's difficult to say. I'll speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.